This is Grise Fjord, where the cold stings your lungs and the land itself feels like a last outpost. Mountains tower over a tiny, resilient cluster of homes, an Inuit hamlet of about 140 people, Canada's northernmost community. Remote, rugged, and for the past 75 years, the front line of our national sovereignty. I'm Hannah Thibodeau. Welcome to The Arctic Edge, stories of Canada's frontier. In this episode, we're asking, what does Canadian sovereignty and security really mean in the modern Arctic? To answer that, we have to roll the clock back to the 1950s. The world was still recovering from the trauma of the Second World War, but a new power struggle was taking shape, with the Soviet Union and the United States muscling in as rival superpowers. This was the dawn of the Cold War. And with it came the weapons of a new era: nuclear warheads, jet-powered bombers, and long-range missiles that could reach the other side of the world in mere minutes. New technologies rewrote the rules of war. The oceans no longer kept danger at bay. They just slowed it down. The fastest path to strike North America was straight over the top of the world.
The facts of the air threat from the north are grim.
That fear gripped an entire generation.
On a parallel just north of 66 degrees is the Arctic Circle.
The threat of a surprise attack wasn't just in the headlines. It was baked into newsreels, classroom drills, and Cold War documentaries.
If modern bombers carrying modern bombs over the polar ice cap were to cross the Arctic Circle at midnight, they could destroy virtually any Canadian or American city before dawn.
It was part fact and part fear. A message crafted not just to warn the public, but to build urgency, to shape opinion, and mobilize will. And it worked. It sparked a race, scientific, military, and technological, all aimed at shielding North America from the unthinkable.
In 1952, some of the country's best scientific and military minds were assigned that problem. Working together at MIT's Lincoln Laboratories, they finally developed a daring plan. This was to build a radar network above the Arctic Circle, a distant early warning line which would span the North Polar region and which no hostile aircraft could cross undetected.
And in 1957, the DEW line was activated. The Distant Early Warning Line was a high-tech tripwire built to detect Soviet invaders. 63 radar stations stretched across the Arctic, from Alaska in the west to Iceland in the east, most of them on Canadian soil. It was jointly operated by the Royal Canadian Air Force and U.S. Air Force. And it laid the foundation for a new military alliance, NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. But even before the DEW line was fully installed, Ottawa knew radar alone wasn't enough. A military surveillance system couldn't assert sovereignty alone, so the federal government made another move. One that would change lives forever. And that's where Grise Fjord enters the story. In 1953, Canada's federal government forcibly relocated 8 Inuit families from northern Quebec to Grise Fjord.
Those people were brought there by the federal government as human flagpoles. It was at a time when RCMP had a number of posts up along the islands. Ellesmere Island had a number of RCMP posts, and they were using Greenlanders as guides. And when this Canadian sovereignty needed to be exerted, what the federal government did was take 8 families from northern Quebec in Inuit and brought them up to Grise Fjord.
David Akeeagok's relatives were among the first families forced north in 1953, sent to the edge of the map to stake a claim. They weren't settlers, they were symbols. And as David puts it, they were human flagpoles, planted to prove Canada's presence in the high Arctic.
My parents were relocated on the second wave, where my dad was brought in from Arctic Bay area to Grise Fjord, and that's how my 2 brothers were born somewhere else. But the rest of us, there's 13 of us that were born all in Grise Fjord. So that's been my home. But my dad and my 2 brothers were moved there when they were very young.
It is one of the most painful chapters in Canada's Arctic past. The families were promised abundant wildlife, warm homes, a better life, and they were told it was temporary, that after 1 year, they could return to Quebec. None of it was true. There were no homes, no support, no way back. They were left to survive on a land they didn't know, in a place they didn't choose.
I know it's the dark part of the Canadian history of relocating the families, but through that, I think we've strengthened and from my perspective, I'm one of the proudest Canadians that I can be. I know that what had happened is not acceptable today, but it happened, and those folks that were there were able to find ways of living there and making it enjoyable for younger generations like us.
And it's the part of, why the Arctic is sovereign. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. And it's something that we consider ourselves in Resolute and Grise Fjord as to being the Canadian flagpoles. Human, figuratively speaking, as humans, that we were brought in and to live there so that Canada can assert their sovereignty to Ellesmere Island and the Arctic. So that's what has happened.
For David Akeeagok and the Inuit families who were relocated, sovereignty isn't theoretical. It's personal. It's the story of his family and of a community built out of sacrifice, survival, and sheer resolve. Grise Fjord wasn't just a settlement. It became a symbol of what it meant to assert sovereignty and the human cost that came with it. But while families were being moved north to physically anchor Canada's claim to the Arctic, the strategy was already shifting, from people on the ground to radar towers in the sky. Surveillance systems took over, and for decades, the DEW line became the front line, until one day, it wasn't. By the 1990s, the Cold War had ended. The threat had changed. The DEW line, once a technological marvel of the Cold War defense, was decommissioned. But the Arctic never lost its importance. If anything, it became even more urgent in 2024, when Donald Trump was elected to a second term as President of the United States.
The world is a more dangerous place when you have an unstable individual in the White House.
Scott Clancy is a retired Major General who served 37 years with the Royal Canadian Air Force. His final post was Director of Operations for NORAD during Donald Trump's first term. So he has experience with Trump's disruptiveness.
I say unstable, not because I think he's necessarily mentally unstable, but because his, how he's going to react on any given day and how the administration is going to react is not easily predicted by any other nation.
The general would say real security depends on predictability. And unpredictability, he warns, is exactly what Donald Trump brought to the world stage. from trade and climate change to NORAD, NATO, and Arctic defense. The rules are constantly changing.
I think that this is a much more dangerous place writ large. So here's a few things. The Secretary of Defense has said that European security needs to be guaranteed first and foremost by Europeans, and that the United States is not in the business of coming to their aid. You need to spend 5% of your GDPs. We are now shifting focus to the security of North America and dealing with our major adversary, China. All of those things, the 5%, pivoting towards China, all the rest that can be true without the underlying idea of we're not going to come to your aid.
Say what you will about the Trump administration and the America First posture. For better or worse, he did get the world's attention. And here in Canada, it hit a nerve, especially when he started musing out loud about turning this country into a part of the United States.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protection, military protection. We don't need them to build our cars. I'd rather see Detroit or South Carolina or any one of our Tennessee, any one of our states build the cars. They could do it very easily. We don't need them for the cars. We don't need them for lumber. We don't need them for anything. We don't need them for energy. We have more energy than they do. We don't need them for energy. So I say, why are we doing this? Why are we willing to lose between $100 billion and $200 billion a year? We don't need them. As a state, it's different. As a state, it's much different. And there are no tariffs. So I'd love to see that, but some people say that would be a long shot. If people wanted to play the game right, it would be 100% certain that they'd become a state.
That's really an unfortunate moment.
PJ Akeeagok is the 6th premier of Nunavut. The premier is being somewhat diplomatic in his language, calling it an unfortunate moment. President Trump's remarks were jarring, and they had impact. But the premier says all the Trump talk about annexing Canada had an unexpected upside. His 51st state chatter got the average Canadian thinking and talking about Arctic sovereignty.
It really has unified us from coast to coast to coast, so as challenging as it is. I've never seen the country rise above really all the rhetoric and all the challenges that are being faced to us.
The premier calls it an historic turning point, a moment to reinforce Canada's sovereignty and security, not with slogans, but with real investment and opportunity in the Arctic.
When Donald Trump really put the spotlight in terms of Canada's sovereignty, the real vulnerabilities weren't in southern Canada. It was actually in northern Canada, and one where we've really highlighted for many years that we have to see the level of investment that you see in southern Canada to happen up in the north as well. And that's where it's been incredible to see everyone rise up. In Nunavut, you see Inuit really leading the case in terms of wanting to see a vision for not only the North, but for Canada, and that there's so much potential around what we could do. So I really think the President Trump's galvanized the view that we've always had, but I think it's unified the country from coast to coast to coast that we need to do something, and that when you look at opportunities, many of that is in the North.
So yes, Donald Trump may get some credit for reigniting the conversation around Canadian sovereignty. Because if you're serious about sovereignty, you have to be serious about the Arctic. But let's be honest, the timing helped too.
Doug Ford made it official.
We will be calling the election next Wednesday.
I've just requested that the Governor General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th.
A federal election and the Ontario provincial campaign collided in early 2025, and suddenly the North was at the center of the national conversation. Resource development and the role of First Nations and Indigenous communities took center stage in both races.
We need to take advantage of the incredible resources we have here in Ontario, our abundant mineral wealth.
In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford pushed hard to accelerate development of the Ring of Fire.
Every critical mineral in the world, they need it, We have it, they want it, and we'll make sure we deliver it.
A mineral-rich region, key to EV manufacturing and the clean tech economy. And on the federal stage, Mark Carney sent a clear signal.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threats to our sovereignty.
His very first domestic trip as Prime Minister, Inuit, Nunavut. The message was unmistakable. The Arctic isn't just a part of Canada, it's a priority.
Canada is strong when we recognize Indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land, who remind us of the deep roots from which we grow and underscore the values to which we aspire. And this is one of the many reasons why my first official trip as Prime Minister is here in the Inuit Nunavut.
He didn't waste time. Prime Minister Carney backed his commitment with action, with major investments in Canada's north.
As we take action to build a better future together, we must invest in Canada's north to defend our sovereignty. Arctic sovereignty is a strategic priority of our government. Recently, Minister Blair announced over $2.67 billion in investment in military facilities, including one here in Iqaluit. And today I'm announcing that our government will be working with our long-standing defense and security partners, Australia, to build a new long-range, over-the-horizon military radar system. This is an investment of more than $6 billion in the most advanced and efficient radar system. The over-the-horizon radar system will enable Canada to detect and respond to both air and maritime threats over our Arctic faster and from further away. It will, most fundamentally, keep all Canadians safe.
Premier Akeeagok says that investment isn't just welcome, it's long overdue. Securing the Northwest Passage and other key sites in the Arctic isn't just smart policy, it's a national imperative. Because the urgency isn't just for the Arctic region, it's for the security of the entire country.
It's crucial. We are at the center of really that sovereignty claim to the Arctic, just with our friends and family in Greenland. We share the same language, Inuit, we share the same culture, we are the same people. You look across, there's really an artificial barrier that separates the two jurisdictions, but Inuit had moved freely back and forth and kept the connection from a linguistic, from a cultural component, among others as well. So when you look at the opportunities around, we realize just how important the Northwest Passage is. It has really brought the attention of the world in terms of people talk about climate change and opening of the, with sea ice receding, that channel will become a critical point in the coming years, but one where I do see Inuit have to be at the forefront and Inuit have to be at the table in terms of how they want their environment, how their communities to grow.
When we look at Arctic security, sovereignty, these are critical investments that should be made in developing the North.
Former federal cabinet minister Leona Akeeagok says the time is ripe for Nunavut and Canada to take full advantage of great opportunities.
In connecting the Arctic to the rest of Canada around sovereignty, around security, especially more so now than ever. And to move forward in those initiatives is going to be very important if we're looking at bridging the gap.
There's a phrase that's often linked to former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Never waste a good crisis. Whether he said it or not, it's been used as a rallying cry in moments of global upheaval, from the Second World War to the 2008 financial crisis, to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is one of those moments. High stakes, hard truths, and a chance to get it right.
never give up the opportunity of a crisis. And I think we're in one currently with our dealings with the United States.
This is a moment of crisis in global geopolitical history. As uncertain, as unstable, as dangerous as it may be, General Clancy says it presents Canada and Nunavut with unexpected opportunities to bridge the social and economic gap between the Arctic and the rest of the country, to do some generational nation building, and to take a leadership role internationally.
And I think that feeling of betrayal that many of us have across provides a unique opportunity for us to re-look at what we value inside of our nation and why we value those things and what our national interests are.
What is in the national interest? That's the question at the heart of sovereignty and security, and it threads through everything we've explored throughout this series. Economic growth, resource development, infrastructure, education, cultural resurgence. Clear recognition that Arctic history isn't just regional, it's foundational to Canada's future. Because sovereignty at its core means freedom, independence, and control. It's the connective tissue of a nation, and it's what makes us strong.
And strength comes from healthy communities and prosperous families.
You need to be in a strong position to exercise your freedom, your independence, and control. Agnico Eagle Chair Sean Boyd draws a direct line between sovereignty and strong communities.
You can't have sovereignty without strong communities. And you can't have strong communities without proper investment in social infrastructure. And then it's how does government and industry work together to optimize that opportunity.
Agnico Eagle isn't just Nunavut's largest private sector employer. It's a company that's invested billions, with a B, into the territory. And that investment goes far beyond the mine site. In 2021, when families in Iqaluit were told their tap water may be contaminated with petroleum hydrocarbons, Agnico Eagle flew in 15,000 liters of clean drinking water. During the pandemic, when Nunavut workers were told to stay home, Agnico Eagle still paid them 75% of their salaries. And they've stepped up in other ways too, offering their runways as alternate landing strips and supporting search and rescue efforts in a region where government resources are often stretched thin. And we give the final word to Premier PJ Akeeagok. He was born in Grise Fjord, a place, as we've learned, that exists because his family was forced to go there. Remember, this wasn't a choice. It was a sacrifice ordered by Ottawa in the name of sovereignty. In 1994, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples issued a report on the high Arctic relocation. In no uncertain terms, the Commission concluded the forced relocation was a violation of international human rights. The report concludes the relocation was an ill-conceived solution that was inhumane in its design and its effects. The conception, planning, execution, and continuing supervision of the relocation did not accord with Canada's then prevailing international human rights commitments. The Inuit were treated as less than human. And still, PJ Akeeagok calls himself a First Canadian and Canadian first. Not because he forgets what happened, but because he refuses to let it be forgotten.
I'm wearing the beautiful maple leaf right on my sealskin vest here, and I'm perhaps one of the most proudest Canadians you'll ever find. But I know what costs Inuit have had to endure for us to, in the name of Canada. And so my family, but so many others as well, were used as human flagpoles. There's a lot of history in terms of what the government did to assert sovereignty in the North. but not very many Canadians know just what happened just not long ago. So there's been some really challenging moments for many of those families, and many of whom are still up there as well. So from that viewpoint, it really does hit home when we are talking about Arctic security, Arctic sovereignty, just knowing just the price that Inuit, including my family, had paid in terms of the maple leaf that I wear so proudly.
In the end, sovereignty isn't just about maps or military presence. It's measured in lives and in the legacy of those who held the North when no one else would. It's about the people. People who were moved without consent and stayed with intention, who built homes in places most Canadians will never see, who turned hardship into heritage and survival into strength. That's what makes the North strong. And that's what makes Canada stronger. I'm Hannah Thibodeau. Thank you for listening to The Arctic Edge, stories from Canada's frontier.